Mr. Chairman, Head 84, Ministry of Labor, Social Security, and Third Sector, in the amount of $20,476,014.
Thank you. I will invite the Honourable Member for St. Peter to give his opening remarks, but before I do, let me outline for the benefit of the public officers who may be here for the first time and for the benefit of the honourable members, the procedure that governs these sessions. Honourable Member of St. Peter, who is the substantive minister, is given 10 minutes for the introductory remarks, comments. Thereafter, he's given, for each question that may be posed to him, 5 minutes to respond, or you may direct an officer from your ministry to give the response, in which case the officer will give their name and the position in the ministry, and they have 3 minutes to respond. Honorable members would indicate their intention to pose a question, entitled a question, and which is within 3 minutes. If you utilize your full 3 minutes with preamble, well, then we will have to move on. In other words, you cannot take 3 minutes for preamble to the question and then ask the question or expect additional time for the questions. So it is 3 minutes which you will have the privilege to utilize however you wish, but it is not both of both worlds. Thereafter, you can ask a supplementary question, 3 supplementary questions, a question that aligns with the first question that you have asked. It cannot be a separate and totally distinct question from what you asked at first. That is when you are allowed the 3 supplementary questions. If you don't have any questions, any supplementary questions, we would then move on. You indicate by the raising of your tile, ensure it catches my attention so that we do not have members who would have indicated they wanted to ask a question and then they're waiting for an exceptionally long time. Just ensure that you catch my eye. For the honorable members to my right, on the back bench, sometimes because of the person sitting in front of you, I'm unable to see your tile, so just for sure, you make sure that I can see it. Honorable Member for St. Peter, you may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have the pleasure, the honor, and it is my responsibility to lead a team, most of whom I've become very familiar with over the past 7+ years, a hardworking team that has done significant work on behalf of the people of this country, particularly on behalf of the workers of the country and on behalf of civil society, the third sector. The estimates that we discussed today speak to continuing that work, intensifying the work done by the ministry over those years. And that work centers around the provision of decent work, both locally and overseas. It speaks to our interaction with the National Insurance and Social Security Service. It also speaks to third sector development, working with faith-based organizations, developing philanthropy, and strengthening our social dialogue systems. I will use this opportunity to remind this honorable chamber of some of the work that we have done over the years, and also speak to what we are continuing, intensifying, and then there are a few new areas that we will be moving into. Now, our mantra And this mantra came out of a discussion I had with the Honourable Member for St. Michael's South Central. But the mantra that I use and that we use is protection and production. And the vision that we have, again, comes out of a discussion with a member from the other place, the minister responsible for industry and innovation. And that is creating a Barbados that is the best place to work, to contribute or give back, and to retire. Now, under the umbrella of worker protection and the provision of decent work, we have, over the past few years, legislated the prevention of discrimination in relation to employment. We've created the Job Start Plus program as a national first jobs initiative. We've established rates of pay and conditions of work for workers in construction businesses who are engaged under contracts paid for by taxpayers. We have legislated that workers in establishments receiving concessions from the state must adhere to certain standards in terms of rates of pay and conditions of work. We've established rates of pay and conditions of work specifically for the hotel sector. We established a full-time tribunal under the Employment Rights Act. We created a framework that provides grants to organizations that wish to retrofit premises to allow for the employment of people with disabilities. We've also created occupational safety and health regulations for some areas, including the provision of personal protective equipment, noise, the provision of drinking water, the provision of toilet facilities, just to name a few. We've provided special protections for workers in petrol stations. We've worked with the BWU, Barbados Workers Union, to establish a national workplace wellness policy, and we've implemented a strong program, including an annual forum. We re-established an overseas worker program in the United States of America. We helped to create the Barbados Job Register, and we managed that register. We oversaw the practical implementation of full free movement with Belize, Dominica, and St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And we established for the first time in Barbados a national minimum wage and increased it on 2 occasions. With respect to Social Security, we have provided and administered the program for special needs grants for additional categories. There were 2 categories before, but we've added some additional, including autism, people with advanced multiple sclerosis, Down syndrome. We've introduced the concept of family leave and provided for 3 weeks paid paternity leave for fathers. We've extended maternity leave, paid maternity leave for mothers by 2 weeks, with an additional 3 weeks in situations of multiple births. We have put measures in place to revitalize the national insurance scheme to ensure its sustainability. We've improved the governance of the Social Security Organization, and we have established a self-employed unit in the National Insurance and Social Security Service. In the area of the third sector, we've organized and executed many capacity building interventions. We've worked with third sector organizations to develop a philanthropy portal. We set up the Social Justice Committee and facilitated the involvement of third sector organizations in policy formulation. We also provided grants for third sector organizations to assist them in funding projects that are of national benefit. And we facilitated annual symposia for leaders of faith-based organizations to build relationships, to share experiences, and also ultimately to learn from each other. In the area of social dialogue, we've coordinated meetings of the full social partnership as well as the subcommittee of the social partnership to address areas of national concern. We coordinated the creation and the signing of the Declaration of Mission Barbados. We coordinated the preparation of a draft of Protocol 7, and we've led the Caribbean governments in setting the labor agenda at the International Labour Organization, and we've also led in the work of various ILO committees and International Labour Conference committees. There is some work that we've started that is not complete. There are amendments to the Employment Rights Act, legislation to effectively protect the pay of workers, creating new legislation to govern the recruitment of workers and how private employment agencies operate, establishing rules for the Employment Rights Tribunal, amending the labor clauses, Public Contracts Act, to better ensure that there is decent work, particularly in projects funded by taxpayers, creating legislation for the recognition of worker and employer organizations, actually launching the philanthropy portal. We are working in terms of finalizing the migrant labor protocol, establishing a new website, establishing a more modern labor market information system, finalizing the national minimum wage indexing model, having a home for the Employment Rights Tribunal, developing in conjunction with the Ministry of Training and Technical and Vocational Training, a new apprenticeship system that is in process. The work to realize the actual signing of Protocol 7, we are working to develop third sector legislation, and we are working on setting up regulations in our social security organization to stop discouraging people with disabilities from moving into paid employment. We are also working on a work at height regulation. There are areas of new work. About to start work, on providing grants to faith-based organizations to assist them with executing youth-related projects. You may recall that in our 2026 manifesto, we speak to a $5 million program, and we are about to start work on that. Establishing rates of pay and conditions of work in the wider construction sector, not just the areas related to taxpayer-funded contracts, but the wider sector. Developing and elevating the work of the care economy. Conducting research on the gig economy and on platform economy work. We are going to begin our work on developing a labor code, implementing our Decent Work Country program with the International Labour Organization, and developing a mechanism to determine a living wage for Barbados. These are some of the new areas, some outstanding from before, and some related to the pledges, the commitment that we made in the manifesto of 2026. So, Mr. Chair, what I've shared represents our goals, and that goal is to ensure that in Barbados there is protection, there is production, and that we create ultimately a Barbados that is the best place to work, to contribute or give back, and to retire. Thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, I move that Head 84 stand part.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Let me at the onset thank the Honourable Member and the Minister with Responsibility for Labour and his team for the work that they continue to do in driving labour and labour standards in our country, particularly at a time when the future of not just the country, but the health of the economy rests on having a labour force with a skill set anchored by 21st century skills. But of course, Mr. Chair, and through to the Honourable Member and Minister, there clearly is, as would have been outlined in other contributions in this estimates process and further afield, issues of literacy. In the Ministry of Education, of course, we have been focusing with a certain degree of focus on ensuring that we can close the gap with respect to literacy and numeracy. But equally, outside of the school system, there are adults in our country who also must now close that gap in earnest. And I see under sub-program 573 in your estimates that there's a focus, of course, on adult literacy. Now, I'm mindful, of course, that there's a Ministry of Technological and Vocational Education, which also will be having its own adult literacy program. So I wanted to get a sense as to what partnership exists or would exist between the two ministries so as to ensure that there's a comprehensive national strategy for adult literacy in the country.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The matter of adult literacy is, as you have indicated, a matter of importance, but literacy across the board, a matter of importance. We've seen the issue or the challenge raise its head when we attempt to work with adults to facilitate their movement into employment. And we recognize the challenge that people have. We also come face to face with the fact that adults have certain sensitivities that must be recognized. And I just want to say before I ask the program manager in our People Development, Implementation and Monitoring Unit to respond, to say that we've recognized that it presents a barrier, a real barrier to persons accessing, to people accessing both further education, accessing training, and being able to conduct themselves in a way that will allow for their advancement. Now, we recognize that the matter of adult literacy and addressing the matter is not just one for our ministry, and I'm pleased to say that we have, over the past, I would say maybe about 6 months, established a very good working relationship with the Ministry of Technological and Vocational Training. We've done some work together with respect to apprenticeships, but the chemistry is such that this working together will happen. Now, the People Development Advisory Council is also made up of persons from the Ministry of Technological and Vocational Training. And so whatever we do to advance this matter will include that ministry. But I spoke about the working relationship only to say that beyond the advisory council, the actual working together at the technical officers level has already started, whilst in a different area, but it portends very well to working on this matter, the matter of adult literacy, to make sure that we can get our people to a place where they feel good about themselves and where they're able to access the various opportunities that are available for them, or that could be available for them once they cross that hurdle. I will ask the program manager, Ms. Erica Watson, to share some more with respect to answering the question.
Thank you, Minister. Erica Watson, Program Manager for the People Development Program. I'll just add to what the Minister has said in that we work very closely with the Ministry of Tertiary Education and Training, and we also work with other ministries to address this issue of adult literacy. And in terms of our partnership with the Ministry of Tertiary Education, for example, they have been a key partner in what we're doing right now. Our focus has been developing a national strategy. And the reason why we focus on the planning and so on is because we recognize there are many stakeholders that will be involved in addressing adult literacy. And we need to have something that pulls them all together and facilitates the necessary coordination. So the Ministry of Tertiary Education has been a very active partner in that. They helped us in the design and right now the ongoing procurement of that consultancy. They will be key in terms of our work in implementing of it. But outside of that, what is going to come from that strategic plan, the policy, the strategy, and the action plan will inform their programming as much as it will inform ours. And this strategy is going to also involve some other ministries such as the Ministry of Youth and so on to really effectively tackle the issue of adult literacy. We do boast of a high literacy rate, and that's not wrong in the sense of how it is measured. We get that because of the level of education that persons acquire up to secondary school and tertiary education. But the reality is, from labor's perspective, we're looking at functional literacy and the ability to have those skills that are needed to really capitalize on the opportunities in the labor market so they be effective in the workplace. and to really realize their full potential in terms of having the necessary skills. So we have that indicator of, for example, over 40% of our adult population who have no certification. That's the closest thing that we have outside of a formal assessment of it. So it's definitely a real issue that we will be seeking to tackle with the development of this strategy and its subsequent implementation.
Thank you very much, Minister, and your team. Chair, I just have one follow-up question to that. One would be, you would have mentioned, Minister, the idea of partnerships, given, of course, the fact that, yes, the ministry leads on issues of labor, but there are other ministries and partners who have to help to build it out. And I am happy that that was raised because, for example, when we look at the future skills for the country, when you look at countries in the Arab world, many in Asia, part of their model of future-proofing the skill set necessary is that there's a standing partnership with the Ministry of Responsibility for Labor, Ministry with Responsibility, or ministries with responsibility for education, but in addition, ministries that also are part of the productive sector. And why is that? If you use UAE for an example, that body meets quarterly to review where they're at in terms of meeting their objectives. So the curriculum that you see today in UAE is driven by where the country wants to go within the next 15, 20, 30 years of its national development. And therefore, you're preparing the skill set and workforce to be able to drive the economy and the country in that direction. And my question, therefore, to you would be, how do you see such a model working in Barbados so as to ensure that as we're preparing our young people in education for not just the workforce, but for business and the necessary skills that they're going to have to use to navigate Barbados, the region, and the world, how do you contemplate this year, for example, in this estimates process that we're in, for us to build out that type of strategic alignment with, one, the education system at the secondary level, certainly at the tertiary level, but you being the anchor in terms of labor standards, as well as the labor market to drive us within the next 15, 20 years of our development.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. A very good question, and it takes us to a place where we need to intensify our work and do that relatively quickly. Now, we took an approach previously that did not work very well. I'm going to answer in a number of areas before I ask the program manager to come back. We did, through a consultancy, some work to find out from industry what were their future needs. And because of my background in the business world, the answers that we got back did not surprise me, because running a day-to-day business or running a business from day to day, you're not often in a position to think about what you're expecting 5, 10, 15 years down the road. You're trying lots of times to keep yourself afloat at the current moment. So we recognize in the ministry that we had to do more than just ask people who are already in business what they saw as needs 10, 15, medium to long term. Now, we have noted the areas in the manifesto. There are a number of areas in the manifesto with respect to life sciences, pharmaceuticals, a number of areas identified there. But we recognize that we have to do a little better, and we thought that we would bring together persons from various areas into what we refer to as skills councils. And we are in the process of establishing the first one in renewable energy. We realize, though, that we have to do it in other areas. Now, that is one, and the program manager will expand on that. I'll also say, though, that in our ministry, we're going to pay close attention to a construct that already exists at the regional, or let me say the hemispheric level at the OAS, a collaboration between ministries of education and labor. Now, previously we have focused a lot on the labor component and not as much on the collaborative component of it. And I know that the Ministry of Education has focused on the education component. It is our intention to use that forum as well to help us with the coordination at that level while we execute on the ground the collaboration that will be necessary for us to make sure that our educational institutions recognize what's ahead of us based on work that we do with all partners, and that we are educating our people, young people, older people, but educating our people for those future responsibilities. This is important if our economic development is going to be sustained. And so we recognize that interacting with the productive sectors will be important, and we propose to do that through the skill sector councils. I'll ask Ms. Watson to speak some more on the skill sector councils and any other matters related to the collaboration as she sees fit.
Yes, thank you, Minister. Just to add in, what we recognize that in terms of really positioning Barbadians or persons in Barbados to access the future opportunities, it will be critical to have a high level of dialogue, research. We have to be information driven, and the Minister mentioned the People Development Advisory Council. That's our first level of dialogue consultation, where we're going to include the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Training will be a part of that. It's tripartite structure, so we have the workers' representatives, employer representatives, the education and training sector will be a part of that council. And that is a council that is intended to meet monthly, and from previous councils, they meet monthly, they have subcommittees that do targeted work that has been identified as a priority. Additionally, as the Minister mentioned, our sector skills councils that we're looking to set up, this is going to provide a mechanism where we have, led by the private sector, where we have those industry leaders in the identified target priority sectors to let us know what's happening in the sector, what is the future developments, what's the recent trends, where are there gaps in terms of the skills, potential opportunities that will emerge, and stay on top of that. And that will inform then education and training. It will inform our career guidance work, employment promotion, how can we facilitate the employment of these persons, and so on. So that is another level of consultation that will facilitate us staying on top of what's happening, the developments in the different sectors. As the Minister mentioned, we have prioritized, we're starting with the renewable energy sector, but this year we have an aggressive agenda of setting up at least up to four sector councils in some of the areas that we've targeted, from discussions, dialogue with construction, tourism, and then in terms of information technology services. But that is something that even as we have further consultation and it has to change or evolve, that can change. And that work will be guiding what we're going to be doing in terms of developing and modernizing the apprenticeship system, and they're going to be guiding in terms of the changes in the education and training and other areas that we have to prioritize in terms of accessing these opportunities that are coming on board. As the Minister said, there's a significant investment in terms of life sciences, so that's another area where Sector Skills Council will come and play. And this is to complement future work that we have to continuously be doing in terms of labor market analysis, see what our data is showing, but also doing some targeted research in certain areas. So it is a comprehensive approach that has to be taken so that we are better prepared, more forward-thinking in our ecosystem for education and training and in terms of employment. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Program Manager. If I may just add to say that the research we're going to be doing, I'm just circling back to what I said in the initial response to the question. We recognize that we cannot do only local research. based on the limitation in terms of vision that we may encounter from time to time. And so the research we will do will involve moving beyond our shores. I mentioned hemispheric, but also it's going to be global, because we have to stay current, stay abreast of what is happening internationally, because that will impact us. It impacts how technology develops. And if we are to stay cutting edge or become cutting edge and then stay current, we will need to know what is happening and what is the vision for some of the larger players internationally. So, like Honourable Member, you spoke to what's happening in the Arab states. In some of those places, we have to, even though we are more resource constrained, we have to take a similar approach to how we determine what those new areas will be, how we are able to establish ourselves in the areas that we could have a comparative advantage, and then how we move forward in those various sectors.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I'm glad you mentioned that, because as you rightly said, whilst our resources are constrained, our ambition certainly must not be. And I think what you and your team has outlined so far, working with us, of course, will allow for the country to always be in a moment of future-proofing the skill set necessary to navigate where we go. And just lastly, it would be on that point too, is to say that, as you may be aware, the ILO has a significant number of resources, particularly at the technical level, in helping states like ours to be able to navigate the future of these spaces.
Thank you very much. We definitely will avail ourselves more of the ILO resources. I have to confess that in spite of the significant engagement we have had over the years with the ILO, we have not made as full a use of the resources as we could have and should have. And we determined, this is sometime, I think, in 2024, as we started to prepare for the Decent Work Country program, that we would use those resources in a much more effective way to make sure that the international input that we have is, the international resources, the resources out there for us to use, that we make use of them, recognizing our own constraints, but recognizing that there is help out there that can supplement our work.
All right, thank you, Honourable Member.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning through you to the Minister and the team from the Ministry. Minister, at your sub-program 25 is the Job Start Plus program, which had approved estimates of about 2.9 million for 2025, financial year 2025-2026. Approved estimates of 2.9 million, but revised estimates of about 1.5 million. And again, for the year 2026-2027, the estimates that are currently before the House, a proposed appropriation of 1.5 million. I mention these numbers because it seems to me that in the last financial year, the scope may have been envisioned to be greater for the program, and perhaps you can tell us a bit about that. But also to ask a question about the effectiveness of the program, the extent to which the ministry has done any review to understand what has been its impact what are some of the kinds of changes that might need to be made in order to realize greater impact. And I'll tell you why specifically I asked. The Job Start Plus program is exactly what it says. It is intended to be able to give a first engagement with the job market for young people. And it is not on its own in that regard, because there are similar programs across government that seek to introduce young people to training and work thereafter. I think of Construction Gateway as one of them. One of the challenges it seems these kinds of programs seem to be experiencing is the capacity of the private sector to be able to partner with the ministry or with the government to take up some of these, some of the young people. And there are real issues related to that. I do not gather that it is an absence of will. So I wanted to hear from you about what are some of the challenges the program has experienced and what are some of the ways in which you will address those challenges.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. You've identified some of the major, well, at least one of the major challenges that we have with Job Start Plus. I'll allow the program manager to speak in some more detail. But besides the fact that there are some other programs, you've identified the gateways, there's also Prince's Trust, there is the Barbados Youth Advanced Corps. There are a number of other programs that exist, and officers administering all of these programs are essentially knocking on the same doors. And so there is a challenge where that is concerned. And what it says, especially from a policy perspective, so from my perspective, we have to do better collaboration across the various ministries, across the various programs who are addressing some of the same young people and going to many of the same potential employers. Now, Job Start Plus is slightly different from the perspective that it is designed for persons, young people, who are not in education, who are not in employment, who are not in training. Particularly those who have never had work experience. But there are some of those persons who are in some of the other programs as well. So we have that element of, it is not tension, but there is some competing in the same relatively small space. The an additional challenge we have is the amount of the stipend. And the fact that in our program was designed that medium and larger businesses would pay the entire stipend. Now, we had a big, to use maybe a colloquial term, a big lash during the COVID period. But coming out of COVID, potential employers have not gone back to a pre-COVID mindset. There's a lot more caution. Amounts that could be considered relatively small for those of us outside of those businesses are considered important. Material is probably word we would use by the businesses themselves. So we have that particular challenge. Now, the literacy that I mentioned earlier is also another of those challenges, and that's come out in the training, and that's the reason why we are putting programs in place to address that. But we have to do some better collaboration because we need at all times to make sure that all our young people are channel guided in the right direction. We realize that, and we have sought already to have a situation where government maybe takes a little bit more of the burden of the cost. I'm careful how I say that because I know that there are limitations with respect to government revenue and how it can be allocated. And we believe that employing organizations should recognize in a material way, just not theoretically, but in a material way, that there is a responsibility that they have to make sure that our young people are put in a position where they can, realize their potential and not resort to what may be considered antisocial type behaviors. But I will allow the program manager to speak in some more detail to the challenges maybe that she sees on an actual day-to-day basis.
Thank you, Minister. Job Start Plus, the National First Job Program, was conceptualized as a way of helping young persons get into the workplace through placements to gain this work experience. And it was supposed to be through a lot of partnerships across the private sector and the third sector. You spoke to the estimates, the budget, and the majority of the money that is spent on what we call the World of Work training and the pre-placement preparation. So the World of Work training, we have actually expanded that. It used to be 2 weeks, but it's 3 weeks of training where they cover core skills. They cover things like job search techniques. A lot of young persons don't actually have a resume, so they do resume writing, they do interview techniques. And in the expansion, we included the National Transformation Initiative in terms of citizen education. We've also included more in terms of career guidance, and this was based on feedback from our job starters. And we also introduced more of psychosocial topics like work-life balance, family issues, family conflict, and so on. And this, again, is feedback from our work with the job starters and observations that we made. And then we do additional core skills training, career counseling, and so on. That's where the funding really goes. And while they're doing this World of Work training, a stipend is paid to assist with the expenses of coming to the 3 weeks of training. So that's the majority of what the expenditure is about. The other parts of the budget is really based on whether we do have the placements covering the personal protective equipment, for example, the insurance that is covering them, the limited liability insurance, and so on. So that's based on the numbers that we have achieved. Since the program and this World of Work training has been going on now, we have structured it as 3 cycles of training a year. Each cycle is 3 months, monthly, so that's 9 months of training for a maximum of 30 persons per cohort. And up to date, our total is at 951 persons that have benefited from that training. And a cohort is happening all like now, actually. We also, in terms of placements and the results, the outcomes of the program, we have been having challenges with finding the partnerships, and I'm going to expand on that, but we have about, since its inception, we have placed about 410, so about a little bit short of 50% of the training. Essentially, there's different challenges with finding placements, and I will tackle it from the demand side and getting employers and so on. The capacity of our labor market and where there's opportunities really for the young persons who don't have much skills and very limited education. That's the entry-level kind of opportunity jobs that are available. The capacity of the organizations to really facilitate the kind of mentorship, the training that will be needed for young persons that don't have experience. We find our better partners are the ones who have a strong human resource management arm. So who has actual resources dedicated to human resource management, but that's not a lot of the organizations in Barbados. So things like that, we're just being able to focus on the recruitment and selection of the young persons to be placed, positioning for the supervision, the training, and so on. That has been challenging, and that's why some of the partners find it difficult to be a part. Some employers find it difficult to be a part of the program. And as I said, in opportunities, we have had the biggest uptake in hospitality, manufacturing, and retail. And those are where we are finding those opportunities for the young persons. Getting more partners on board, we do believe that there is more we can do in terms of marketing the program, but we try to facilitate the process as much as possible, offering support in planning and positioning the organizations to take on young persons. The minister mentioned covering, helping with the cost of the stipend that are asked to pay the young persons. That is part of it. I'm sure that can bring some improvement. But we also have been observing that a lot of the placements that we have been having, especially this year, hasn't actually been what we call the placements where there's arrangement between government and the employer, but actually employers coming to us and filling vacancies by using our pool of job starters. So they would actually hire them in full-time jobs. And that's been happening more and more. So we think with more marketing and showing that we can facilitate recruitment and selection and offer a pool of talented young persons that have been trained and better positioned, better prepared for the workplace, that can bring some improvements in terms of our numbers. But as I mentioned, there is limited capacity in terms of really the opportunities. Some sectors simply cannot afford the inexperience. We've had a placement, for example, and it costed the company a lot of money in 1 week of that person learning. So I'm just using that to say that some organizations really don't have the scope for that learning curve, right? So that's some of the challenges in terms of finding a good fit. On the demand side also, we are, as what you mentioned, there's a number of other programs. And what we're hoping will happen, and what was also always envisioned with Job Start Plus, is that that can become the main program for work experience. So Ministry of Youth have their programs, education and training institutions have their programs, you have like Ministry of Training have their programs, but when it comes to the employment component, let Job Start Plus manage that, because it will address some of the concerns from the employers. We do have a small labor market. In terms of certain employers that are more known or larger, they get a lot of requests, and they have been saying, you know, it'd be great if it could be coordinated in some way. And that's a way that Job Start can fit into this whole network of different youth employment programs, where you do the training and development under your respective programs, but then we can focus and manage that placement part, because it requires a certain level of support to the employers in planning for the young persons, support for their monitoring and coaching and mentoring, support in terms of helping even with the recruitment and selection. So what the Ministry of Labor can do is focus on that in the context of Job Start Plus. From the supply side, I would say...
Officer, I have given you a good run. Okay. You therefore need to... You have 30 seconds to wrap up. You can always come back.
And, well, some of the challenges also is in terms of we have the opportunities, but then the young persons are not necessarily interested in the opportunities that we do have. So that's on the supply side. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am grateful that you allowed Ms. Watson the extra time, because I'm also grateful for the thoroughness of the answer. I think, Minister, that what I've heard from the officer really are the solutions to the challenges that you have, because what I had noted to be able to recommend, she has already recommended, which would be, given that what you started out with was twice in the original estimates for this program is twice what you ended up spending. It would seem to me that, well, it can't be done in this appropriation unless you have a very good relationship with the Minister of Finance, probably, but what it seems to me is that there needs to be more scope for the stipend to be covered under the program. And Ms. Watson has pointed to why, because these kinds of attachments are expensive to industry. So this is one area that I think should receive some attention. And then, as she had said, there's so many programs that deal with training across government. Let the training programs do the training. And have Job Start Plus be the program appropriately resourced that connects the labor market to talent. And linking it to your manpower surveys and to the work that you just referenced based on the question from the member for St. James North. If you are linking that data in terms of what is needed in industry to the first jobs for these young people, then it seems to me that you have a solution there. But this program is too important to our young people and to industry to be able to just check it as another effort that perhaps did not reach its full potential. So I'm glad to hear that you already have a solution, and I will be looking for that solution that Ms. Watson has outlined to be executed. I only have one follow-up on this issue, and I'll have to come back with my other questions. Minister, you mentioned youth programs for faith-based organizations, so still on the question of youth and opportunity. And your ministry is also responsible for ecclesiastical affairs, which I think is the connection there. Now, while faith-based organizations will now have a welcome opportunity, I'm sure, to execute programs specifically for young people, these programs, notwithstanding the monies being voted for them, will also need other kinds of resources. So the Charities Act that outlines how different kinds of organizations are able to be exempt for certain activities still only makes reference at the relevant schedule of the Act to the Anglican Church. And I think that somewhere along the line, certain language was changed, but the scope still does not allow for other kinds of faith-based organizations and other faiths and the institutions that represent them to be able to be exempt, so that some of these charitable activities or some of these philanthropic activities can be supported. Because we all know that it's not just about the money that you're actually spending on the program, but that if you are able to save costs in other areas, that your work, that money can go further. So I wanted to hear from you about whether there was were any plans to review that legislation and to make sure that all faith-based organizations across every faith represented in Barbados are able to benefit from the exemptions noted there.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. We have been made aware of the restriction that lies in the existing legislation, and even though the Charities Act doesn't fall within our ministry, we've started the work that will lead to a cabinet paper and a proposal to amend the Charities Act. You are correct. As a matter of fact, the memo that was sent from the Cabinet Office to all ministries speaks not any longer to ecclesiastical affairs, even though it is listed that way in these estimates, but that has to change in the final print. We are dealing with religious affairs so that there will be no discrimination, like I said, in employment, but there'll also be no discrimination with respect to various faith-based organizations. And our ministry, the ministry that I have the honor to lead, has a responsibility to be facilitator, almost in chief, for all faith-based organizations. And so the restriction in the Charities Act, I've already spoken to the Permanent Secretary about that, and the amendment will be made so that we remove that discrimination. We expect that, like with Job Start Plus, we are able, so we're doing two things at the same time. We're working on the amendment to that act, but based on our experience with Job Start Plus, we are now starting the process of putting together the terms of reference and also the structure that will allow us to be effective in making sure that any resources that we give are properly spent, but that the systems within the ministry itself are such as would allow for good governance, good supervision, good keeping track of what happens with the grants that we expect ultimately to give. Now, our intention is to have dialogue with leaders of faith-based organizations so that the ultimate structure will have the input of government and faith-based organizations, so that there is ownership, not just from government because we are managing public funds, but also ownership from faith-based organizations because these are the organizations that are executing for our young people. And we will definitely be using some of the lessons learned in Job Start Plus. I'm just linking the two to make sure that these interventions, we'll be sharing those experiences as well with faith-based organizations to make sure that we get good results out of the public funds that we will be putting into this program.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, just one follow-up flowing from what the minister's response. The portal that was established, and I'm on the topic of charity and philanthropic activity, and you made reference in your opening, Minister, to the establishment of a portal, long awaited. I believe there was also meant to be a legislative framework that was adopted for that. And I ask this because there are many people who reach out across government, especially from the diaspora, asking to be able to contribute in kind or in financial resources to various efforts of government. And they encounter all kinds of challenges, either with making timely contact with ministries, with understanding what is the scope for them to be able to contribute, with issues related to duties and taxes and other kinds of exemptions. How are we finally bringing all of this into view and into a manageable program so that those people, I mean, it would be a shame to be able to turn away resources as a small economy. How are we finally coming to terms with that? What is the framework and the structure that your ministry is putting together to be able to satisfy those Barbadians and friends of Barbados who want to contribute to our development?
Thank you very much again, Honourable Member. And we know that a number of those desires to assist are desires to assist in the area of our young people and giving our young people opportunities. And so you are right that this matter has been significantly delayed. One is, and I'm just going to be careful when I say this, one was with respect to COVID, because this is actually, and this is just for transparency, even though it doesn't make me look good, but we were supposed to have had this portal in 2020. This is now 6 years past 2020. We've had some challenges along the way, one related to the COVID and the change in focus that everybody had during the COVID period. But then subsequent to that, there was the matter of the developer organization, is probably how you would phrase that. We've been trying, not for lack of trying on our part, but the developer organization, it seems to have gotten lost somewhere along the line. We are back on track, and the portal is essentially designed. We're in the process of testing, because my ministry and I, as the policy lead in the ministry, we are not going to the public with anything that is not fully tested and working. So I've indicated to the team that I will be making a small donation, and I want to make sure I can see it come right through before we do any kind of launch, soft or hard launch. So that is one. The legislative framework then to govern how that works, but also how organizations dealing with young people and other organizations more generally, how they're able to contribute. We had expected to have an opinion sometime around the middle of last year. But that did not happen because the government's legislative agenda is so packed that it could not be reviewed. There were some requests from us to provide information on what we had developed, but also, well, in terms of policy, because we are not yet at CPC, but what we've developed in terms of policy to guide drafting instructions and drafting instructions themselves. And we provided that to the Office of the Attorney General. And so it is now with the Office of the Attorney General what we have prepared along with some information that could be used for comparative purposes. So when I say that, I'm referring to actual legislation which is in place in some of our Commonwealth colleague countries. That information is now with the Office of the Attorney General, and I expect that we will get a response that will allow us to move forward. Some of those challenges at the OAG included things like issues pertaining to money laundering, terrorist financing, or financing of terrorism. And there are a lot of strictures, a lot of rules from various organizations, including the EU, including the OECD, that we had to try to navigate around. And you get different responses from different areas, and trying to come up with what will satisfy all of the stakeholders, all of the important stakeholders, has been, I wouldn't say a challenge, but has taken some time. And so we are at the point now where we have a document that could serve the purpose of informing a cabinet paper, but it's actually a draft cabinet paper. And we are waiting an opinion, so this is not necessarily comment, but just a final review, because the Office of the Attorney General had some responsibility. I haven't looked at the current configuration, but has some responsibility for FATF and all the issues that attend to that. So we are working on it, actively addressing it, and we expect to be able to move it forward, the legislative part forward, but also the portal that goes along with it. We recognize the challenges that people have trying to give, and the thing is that it is not even just individuals outside the government who have difficulties. A former High Commissioner said to me that he tried to get some equipment into Barbados, and he almost felt as though he was a foreigner, quote unquote, from someplace far, because he had the same kinds of difficulties that others have experienced in terms of paperwork, getting through customs, and all that needs to happen. And our intention is that we will create the kind of structure and system that will allow potential donors to understand what is required beforehand, so that we are not in a position, well, allow them to understand what is happening beforehand, but we are also creating locally, domestically, the system that will allow the various entities that interact with donations to be able to respond in a timely manner, and not to cause it to appear that we have everything we want and we don't want nothing from nobody.
Thank you, Minister, to you and your team. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Honourable Member for St. Michael Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning. First, I want to start off by thanking the ministry and all the hard work that it has done in advancing the rights and opportunities and welfare of the workers in Barbados. But as the minister correctly stated, there's still more work left to be done. So my question and my series of questions will be in relation to your sub-program 421, which is the Labor Department. Oftentimes, I sit in my chambers and I get phone calls regarding the treatment of workers. For example, the lack of NIS payments, or they're working and the employers are taking out the NIS, but then when something happens, sickness or injury, and they go to claim their benefits, they realize that NIS has not actually been paid in. Another complaint that I often hear about would be, for example, holiday pay. They haven't been paid what they are due in accordance with the legislation. Another would be unfair dismissal. And so I'm seeing and I'm reading that the Labor Department has recorded over 1,500 complaints and more than 3,000 telephone queries relating to labor matters. But I see that out of those 1,500 complaints recorded from April to December 2025, only 20 have been referred to the Employment Rights Tribunal, and only 9 employers were prosecuted. So what my question really is what steps are being taken to reduce these disputes and strengthen enforcement of labor laws?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. Prosecution is not the first step, and so the idea is not to have significant numbers of prosecutions, but to solve the issues and the challenges, vexing as they are, before we get to that point. Now, the Labor Department has had, and I'll allow the Acting Chief Labor Officer to respond as well, but just to say that the Labor Department has had its own challenges with respect to its capacity and not having enough numbers, not having enough people to be able to do all that is necessary. Now, what is necessary has to do with a number of things, but they include inspections. Inspections is a significant part of the work of a Labor Department. Labor administration really is centered on what is referred to in other places as the inspectorate. Now, I'll include the National Insurance and Social Security Service where that is concerned as well, because the Labor Department has not been able to do all the inspection that it should be doing based on the fact that we have not had the staff complement. We have to do inspections, but there are also a lot of telephone calls that we have to field. And I really did not recognize the volume until I became minister. I, on the outside, was one of those who, because of my involvement in HR management, wondered when people were complaining that they are calling and nobody answering the phone, then to recognize that you have maybe 4 officers in the office all on the phone, but the phone is ringing. So 4 people are being attended to, but there may be 2 who will not get an answer because you are working through issues that are often contentious, but also very involved. So that was one. The other area is the matter of putting out to the public the information that could be used for them to address or find the answers to some of the questions that they call the Labor Department about. So with respect to inspections, we have received from the Prime Minister, acting as Minister of Finance, I believe as well, this is obviously before the new configuration, but permission or authorization to have additional posts in the Labor Department. That is critical, and I think that decision came in a social partnership meeting when we were discussing issues in the construction sector. I acknowledge the assistance in pushing that issue, which we received from the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union, and we have approval for some additional posts. We were also able, through the Prime Minister's intervention as well, to push the process a little faster when we were allowed to put out advertisements and do some interviewing. Because before that authorization was given, there was a bottleneck at the level of the Ministry of the Public Service. And so we've been able to move forward more speedily in terms of our resourcing. Now, we are not yet where we are supposed to be. There is still some additional sign-off to happen at the level of the Minister of the Public Service, but the new Minister of the Public Service has assured me that she will be addressing the matter as a matter of urgency. So I have no doubt that we will be able to move forward where that is concerned. With respect to sharing with the public, we have not done as good a job as we could, but again, with resource constraints, the priority becomes those who are calling, those who have emailed, those who have come to the office. And so having the information put out into the public domain has taken a hit, but we recognize that we need specific resource where that is concerned, and in the estimates, there is some funding on the professional fees to allow us to have, I think that's under general management though, not under this subhead, but to allow us to have the resource that will allow us to push more information into the public domain. What I saw, in terms of, I'm just talking about the kind of calls that we get. What I saw when I was involved in the Barbados Hotel and Tourism Association, I did not expect that I would see repeated. And the issue there was, every year, people would call with respect to public holidays and how they're supposed to pay on public holidays. Now, those of us involved believe that everybody knows that. But when I was helping to lead the BHTA, there are people who would call every year and ask the same question. And we have similar in employers, across employers generally, but also workers who are questioning what is happening in terms of if they're being treated according to law. So we have to put more information out, and we have to be consistent in that, and that is an area that we will be focusing on in the next fiscal year to move that matter forward. The National Insurance and Social Security Service, now the service is aware about how I feel with respect to inspections, and I have mandated that we go back to what used to happen in the old days, because I remember as an employer, when National Insurance, well, back then I used to suck my teeth, now I'm the minister responsible. So, but the inspections that employers used to have, we need to have many more of those. There will be a continuing challenge that we will continually have to address, and that is when more and more people move into both self-employment, but also becoming employers in their own small businesses, then you have increasing numbers of establishments to deal with. That is the reality. We will have to be equal to the reality. And so I'm happy that we've been able to get the approval for the additional resources, and that will go a long way into addressing the matters raised by the Honourable Member in terms of issues that keep coming up. I'll end by speaking to a challenge, and this came up yesterday at an event I had for my canvassers and workers. Oftentimes, I as minister, I as MP, but also the Labor Department officers receive complaints, and in an effort, before we attempt to address them, the complainant will say, I don't want you to call my name, because people are fearful, and we understand that. When a matter will refer directly to a person as opposed to a group, it becomes difficult to communicate with the employer and raise the issue when the raising of the issue will point to a specific individual. And those are some of the issues we have. But like I've said before, those constraints, those challenges notwithstanding, we recognize what we have to do with respect to protecting workers, the human beings who build establishments and who are looking to be treated fairly, as all human beings should. And we will intensify our efforts to make sure that the issues, the challenges that workers have are properly addressed. I'll ask the acting chief to speak to the matter as well.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you, Honourable Member. Good morning. My name is Alison Elka. I'm the Acting Chief Labour Officer. With respect to the efforts we are putting in place to reduce disputes and strengthen enforcement, I have to first explain that our approach has been up to this time to prioritize the handling of complaints when persons visit the Labour Department. And so the Industrial Relations section, the officers have always been mostly in the office to deal with, as you can see from the numbers, the hundreds of persons who either call in or visit the department. So that reactive response has given some success in addressing these matters. However, what we are doing at this point going forward is to place greater emphasis on field work, going out to do more inspections and to engage in more public education. We do conduct some seminars. Our view is that by educating both the workers and the employers of the requirements of the legislation, there should be increased compliance with the legislation and therefore reduction in complaints in time. But we also recognize that through those public education efforts and workplace inspections, we can anticipate that there will be an increase in complaints because persons may become more aware and they may therefore then come to the department to complain more. But in time, through our public education and the use of social media, the development of frequently asked questions published on the ministry's website, we'll be able to direct persons to get some of the questions answered early, and that would help us to at least eliminate a portion of those persons visiting or calling the department. Moral suasion has worked relatively well to a point, but we do recognize that it is not as effective as it has been in the past, so we will have to take a different approach, and while prosecution will always be the last resort, we believe that we may very well have to engage in that more and more. So the focus really is on the industrial relations section in particular, being engaged in more field activity and being out there doing inspections, more public engagement, not only through seminars, but through short bits of information being shared. And to ensure that our staff is able to perform those functions well, we're also addressing the staff development. Thank you.
If I may just mention something that I mentioned it in this chamber in the second half of 2023. I want to use this opportunity, and I'm using this opportunity to encourage workers to use the NIS portal as well to monitor the remittance of their contributions. I am not saying that to remove any responsibility from the Inspectorate of the National Insurance and Social Security Service, but I'm saying to the public through you, Mr. Chair, that we'd like workers across the country to monitor their accounts to make sure that when national insurance contributions are deducted, that they're actually remitted to the National Insurance and Social Security Service and to the National Insurance Fund, which the service manages.
Thank you. I'm happy to have the presence here of the acting CLO because I do have a constituent who would have written a letter since 2024 and has not gotten a hearing date as yet. So I'm happy to have you here, but I will let him know that he needs to come in person so that his issue be prioritized. Now, I do hear you in terms of education, but as we lawyers would say, ignorance of the law is not an excuse. So while education is important, what I think is equally important is enforcement mechanisms. And seeing here that it's reported that there were 467 dismissal claims received and 370 unpaid holiday pay claims, and this is just during the period of April to December 2025. What I am interested to hear is what enforcement mechanisms would be put in place to ensure that there's adequate protection for workers' rights?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The enforcement mechanisms are outlined in the law, and they refer to various penalties when there is non-compliance with various actions. Now, I'll give an example of one that comes to me as MP quite often. A person speaks to being mistreated or being unfair. So I'm not talking about unfair dismissal, but just what is seen as unfair treatment. The challenge there, which is what we have to share with people from time to time, workers from time to time, is that we don't legislate against somebody. Just let me do as an extreme just to prove the point. Somebody who passes in front of you every day, a supervisor who passes in front of you every day and looks at you stink and sucks their teeth. There's no legislation to deal with that. Matters of unfair dismissal, clear. Holiday with pay, clear. Pay for vacation leave. Matters related to severance and calculations. Matters related to notice and notice periods. They're all in the information is there in terms of how to proceed with prosecution. There was one area, and this related to Social Security, where I still feel that we could do some strengthening. So all that I've said is not to say that our legislation has everything tied off properly. In Social Security, there are a few areas where we could tighten on the enforcement side. However, my own review as a non-lawyer, but hearing from the officers who are legally trained, is that there is enough that we could be more effective. Sometimes, let me go a different direction as well. In terms of the legal resources that we have, we got, for the first time in my tenure as minister, a legal officer in the ministry about maybe 2 years ago, just over a year ago. But we have quite a lot of labor law to address. Now, so we have now a legal officer, and we have permission to have a second officer. That will allow us to address issues in enforcement, but particularly with what I refer to as a deterrent. So that if the penalty is only $200, then an employer may decide, well, I don't really care about that, they're going to take long to court anyhow and that kind of stuff. If the penalty is more substantive, more substantial, then it may operate and act as a deterrent. And updating the labor laws to increase the deterrent power is what we are working on at the moment. We are also, maybe I should use this opportunity to speak to the fact that in our manifesto, but it is something that we were working on even before that time, before the manifesto was issued, because it is in our Decent Work Country program, which we signed last year, and that is the creation of a labor code. Creating that labor code will allow us to update a lot of our legislation. Maybe, I should probably use the word en masse. No, that's not a legal term. So that may be the wrong way to put it, but that's how a layman sees it. To do a lot of pieces of legislation, update them one time as we create the labor code for the country. So I give the assurance that we've already spoken to the International Labour Organization office in Trinidad. The ILO has assisted a number of Caribbean countries already with both strengthening legislation and creating labor codes. And we have the political party that I have canvassed as a member of, I'm just remembering the legislation on crossing. I've canvassed as a member of the Barbados Labour Party, and we put out a manifesto, and the manifesto speaks to creating a labor code. That is work that the ministry has already started to embark on, and will continue to make sure that we can update the legislation so that it is as robust as is necessary to address as many issues as can be addressed in legislation.
Thank you. I think that would help, but equally, we need to remember that even though we may have the legislative framework, the key is still enforcing that legislation as well. Because you may have the tools, but if no one is enforcing, that's the key word, if no one is enforcing what is already there, then you will have persons slipping through the cracks who would have, fell default of that legislation. So I'm aware I have 3 questions. My final question would be, in law, we say justice delayed is justice denied. So what I want to know from the ministry is, what plans does the ministry have to improve the response times to worker complaints and ensure that workers who feel unfairly treated receive timely justice?
Honourable Member, is this your follow-up question? Because you would have had a question before.
Yes, Chair, this is my 3rd follow-up question.
Okay, you may proceed. Thank
All
you.
right. I will help you, Chair, in turning it into a follow-up question properly, to say that we're talking about I'm using the umbrella of helping the honourable member, worker complaints. Now, the matter of access to justice and timely access to justice is one that we take very seriously. The acting chief is going to speak to it, but let me go beyond the work within the Labour Department proper to also speak to what is happening with respect to the Employment Rights Tribunal. And I'm just going to repeat what I said when the Ministry of Housing was in the well. One of the constraints we've had related to a home for the tribunal. We were initially supposed to have been housed in the complex is that Corey Street? I don't remember, the old Supreme Court building that was redone. Then that did not work out. And for quite some time, we were to be accommodated in the Warren's office complex. Now, I raised the matter when the Ministry of Housing was in the well, and I'm happy to report that on the weekend, on Saturday, and maybe Saturday and Sunday, I received a number of photographs showing cranes, showing containers, indicating that customs, which was really the culprit, keeping their old boxes in the area because they did not want to contaminate their brand new headquarters, but not recognizing that it was impacting the delivery of labor justice in the country. But we are at the point where they are now moving their tacklings, and the Ministry of Housing, maybe as a result of the intervention in the well, is moving ahead to make sure that we can have a home so that the 3 tribunals can meet simultaneously if necessary. We've established a full-time tribunal, and we are moving toward that point where delays will be minimized. Where the Labour Department itself is concerned, because the Employment Rights Tribunal is well managed through the Labour Department, is separate, independent. The acting chief will speak to what is happening within the Labour Department itself.
Thank you, Minister. The Labour Department regards every complaint as important, and we try to treat to them as quickly as possible. But the reality is, with the volume, there is a challenge. So we try our best to manage expectations. The estimates brief indicates that between April and December 2025, there were 1,511 complaints received at the Labour Department. In 2026, January, there were 147. In February, 168. And last week alone, there were 49. And those are just persons who walked into the department. So every month, officers are dealing with a couple dozen new complaints. Let me make that clear. New complaints. Every complaint has to be investigated. A person comes in, a worker comes in, an employee comes in, they make a complaint. We have to investigate it to hear and to get the fullness of the situation. And there can be delays with those investigations for good reason. So officers are balancing the complaint, the investigation, the conciliation meetings, and still trying to get out there to do the inspections I just mentioned to ensure that there is compliance with the legislation. So it is difficult. And as a result, there will be times when things appear to be moving slowly on that matter, but somebody else's matter is being advanced. There's also the officers in the Labor Department, most of them have been in the department for less than 5 years. And through experience, we know it takes 3 to 5 years for an officer to have full competence and confidence, and we're working to reduce that time frame. So once we investigate the complaint, we're satisfied that is something that some action needs to be taken, the conciliation process is followed through in relation to dismissal claims. In relation to the holiday with pay claims, after the investigation, efforts are made to ensure that the employers comply, and in the majority of cases, employers will pay the outstanding holiday pay, and if they don't, then they're prosecuted. And that's done with the support of, up to this point, with the support of the Director of Public Prosecution's Office. As Minister said, we are working towards having internal resources more involved in that process so that we can have a more timely movement, because obviously the DPP has to manage their own volume and the holiday, and manage that with the variety of cases that they have to deal with. So we're doing everything that we can to balance the investigations, the meetings, and ensuring enforcement, not only through getting out in the field and make sure that problems are corrected before they reach the department, but also to recommend or pursue prosecution where it is required.
Thank you. I yield back.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do now report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 10 minutes past 12.
That this honorable chamber be suspended until 12:10 p.m. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. We think the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands suspended until 12:10 p.m. This sitting is resumed. Prior to the suspension, this honorable chamber was debating the Appropriation Bill 2026. We revert to the Appropriation Bill 2026.
Standing Finance Committee is resumed. Honorable Member for St. Michael Northwest.
Thank you, Chair. Blessed good morning to the Minister. Good afternoon to the Minister and his team. In Barbados, we know that labor laws exist mainly to protect workers, ensure fairness in employment, and provide social security. We also know that labor laws are designed to regulate wages, working conditions, and benefits so that employees are not exploited and have access to the protections like pensions, sickness benefits, unemployment support through the NAS scheme. My question to you, sir, relates to what plans your ministry has to capture the lost revenue/resources, mainly from those contract workers who work in government and do not contribute to the NAS system. And my reason for that, sir, for that question is that I have constituents who work in government as contract workers 5 years, 6 years, have not contributed to the NAS system. And I realize that there's a growing number of persons when they reach a certain age coming for assistance with a non-contributory pension because they either do not have sufficient contributions in the scheme or never contributed to the scheme. So my question to you, sir, what plans or mechanism your ministry have in place to really capture the lost revenue from these said workers?
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. The matter of, you were very specific, even though my response is probably going to go a little bit beyond the specific matter. You spoke about government and contract workers. Now, where we have become aware of contract workers who are not contributing, those situations were regularized. We had that in 2 areas that I can remember. One was the Ministry of Transport and Works, and one was the Ministry of the Environment, and at that time, National Beautification. Those matters, and I remember a pretty strong case made, strong is trying to use a nice term, but in a parliamentary group meeting by the General Secretary of the Barbados Workers Union. And immediately after that, we set about to make wrong things right. What I would say though is that if you are aware of other situations in government where people are on contract and they are not genuinely self-employed, then if we bring it to our attention, and once we bring it to our attention, the matter will be definitely addressed. We in the ministry, but also the National Insurance and Social Security Service particularly, do not discriminate with respect to government as an employer or a non-governmental entity as an employer. As a matter of fact, we are of the view, and hold fast to that view, that government ought to be a model employer, so that once there are situations that we become aware of, then we address them. I would also want to speak to the matter of, and while I'll ask the Chief Operating Officer, but acting CEO really, if she wants to make a contribution, she can. But with respect to moving beyond contract workers because you did raise the matter of applying for non-contributory pensions. And quite a number of persons who are legitimately, genuinely self-employed also end up in that same category, applying for a non-contributory pension after not having satisfied the contribution requirement. So they end up often with a grant, but then a grant is a one-off. It can't help you in terms of ongoing resources to keep, as we say, body and soul together. And in that regard, we have, for persons who are genuinely self-employed, so I'm tying it to your question because it could be that some persons might be consultants, might be genuine consultants, might be genuinely self-employed. And we, for that purpose, have set up the self-employed unit, a new unit within the National Insurance and Social Security Service. And there have been the unit, the members of the unit, the staff in the unit have been active already in their outreach to persons who are self-employed to educate them first, because like I said in my response to the Honourable Member for St. Michael Central, we do not go to the punitive as the first step. So that while the law speaks to the fact that self-employed, you ought to be contributing once you're earning above a very, very small amount. Whilst that is the law, we are working to educate, to sensitize, to allow people to understand the importance of Social Security. They may not figure it out now, but there will come a time when they will not be able to earn in the same way. Their income may be interrupted for some reason, and they will have to rely on somebody else to provide for them if they don't have Social Security. So that unit has done quite considerable work with respect to entertainers, our fisher folk, and we are also in the communities across Barbados, going to engage with people who may be mechanics, auto body repair persons, people who do hairdressing, cosmetology, across the range. And I expect that those who provide professional services, who may or may not be some of these contract persons that you speak about, that we're going to be engaging or have engaged with some of them already. But I'll ask the acting CEO to speak to the matter of if we've become aware of contract workers and if we have, what steps, specific steps are being taken.
Good afternoon. Francis Fontenay-Walcott, Chief Operations Officer, National Insurance and Social Security Service. In terms of contract workers and generally self-employed persons, as the Minister would have said, the self-employed unit was set up to look after those category of workers to ensure that we educate them, not only educate them, but use that as an enforcement mechanism as well, that unit, to encourage them to contribute. We have to move beyond the catchment group that we are now targeting, which, as Minister would have said, Minister Jordan would have said, mechanics, fisher folk. We need to look at what Social Security called the liberal professions, persons who are dentists, lawyers, attorneys, who we know over the years are also rather delinquent in contributing. And we will be holding forums targeting that specific group of persons, that sector of professionals, to encourage them as well. In the past, we've noticed that there are some professionals who they consistently pay for the employees, but they do not contribute for themselves. And we want to also inform them of, there's the possibility that life will not be as good all the time as it is now. And there may be a time when you also will need to rely on Social Security. So it's not only incumbent on you to look after your employees, which is very important, but also look after yourself. Contract workers, in most cases, we find the inspectors who visit would be made aware of persons of that nature, contract workers, whether in private sector, persons who are employed on their own. And they have a role to play, which they do, in getting those persons to contribute, to register and to contribute. I must say that since the self-employed unit was established, the rate of registration for self-employed persons has increased. With the introduction of the flexible arrangements to pay, where self-employed person can pay at any time of the year, and it's not limited to paying by quarter or even completing a form. The number of self-employed persons who registered in 2025 was 100% increase over 2024. And those who registered in 2026 and 2025 so far was a 50% increase over 2020. Sorry, I wanted to say 2025 was a 100% increase over 2024. And so far this year, for 2025, we have also seen an increase. However, what we've noticed is that the rate of contributions have not increased at the rate we would like to see. And so we have to be more specific in educating self-employed that the level of your contribution payment determines the level of your benefit. So do not target the minimum amount, target what you have to look at your expenses, look at potentially what could occur in your life and what you need to live on. And your benefit, your contribution payment should be targeted around that, because you cannot get out of of Social Security what you did not put in. And that will be our focus going forward, not only in terms of registering, but in terms of making sure that persons contribute at a level that, if any, the vagaries of life affect them, that the benefit they get is something that they can live on.
If I may add to that, you mentioned, Honourable Member, the matter of applying for non-contributory pension. And I think I owe it to my fellow Barbadians to indicate that a non-contributory pension is not a right. There are people who, and I hear this as minister, but also as MP, maybe every month, at least monthly, where when there are not enough contributions. So I'm speaking to this to underscore the importance of participating in the National Insurance Scheme. I have been a member of the board and have seen persons turned down because, and became aware at that point, so this is long before I got involved in politics, became aware of the fact that there are some pretty significant rules that govern a person's access to non-contributory pension. And so I would want to use this opportunity, and I am using this opportunity to say to workers across the board that a non-contributory pension is not a given. There are a lot of steps and assessments that are going to be done, and I would say more often than not, applications are turned down. I would also say that with regard to the professions that the COO spoke to, I remember, again, in that life as a member of the board, that we had those we call professionals, and in the case that I remember was an attorney whose contribution to NIS was less than the secretary's contribution to NIS. And that was something that we at the board level marveled at for quite some time. The COO is correct that the benefit will be based on the contribution. And for Social Security to work, it means that all of us have to do our part in contributing so that all of us are able to benefit.
Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Thank you, Minister. Honourable Member for St. George North.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I'm first of all grateful to the team, the members of the Ministry of Labor who go to work every day and do their utmost to deliver improved labor conditions in this country. Grateful also to my colleague, the Honourable Member for St. Michael Central, for the very pertinent questions she was able to ask. The original question and all of the follow-up questions that she asked.
And I hope you want to ask the same questions.
You're cutting into my time, Mr. Chair. We recognize that the Labor Department has some very broad powers. The power to inspect and investigate, the duty to ensure enforcement, and of course, the powers to initiate proceedings. But what it caters to is a heavy reliance on administrative discretion. And there are therefore very few procedural timelines that we can find in the legislation. So that what we hear this morning and what we see in the brief about the number of complaints coming and the time that it takes to respond to complaints and the explanation from the Assistant Chief Labor Officer about the staffing and the different things they have to juggle, all noted, but they still relate to a concern on enforcement. So the question really, in as much as we have heard, and this relates to enforcement, in as much as we have heard that there are plans to boost staff at the Labor Department and so on, is the ministry, and this is every opportunity I've had to be in this well, I've asked the question, is the ministry satisfied now, even with the proposal to increase staff, that the ministry will have enough staff to be fit for purpose?
Now, thank you for the question, Honourable Member. That is a question that I will answer carefully. I am not sure that there would be any arm of government that will be able to say with any degree of honesty that they have all that is necessary to do all that needs to be done. Now, I say that as the initial response. I say it though also recognizing that what we're dealing with, and I know I suspect I know where your question is coming from, what we're dealing with here in industrial relations, matters related to workers, is not patching a hole in a road. It involves a human being and the person's existence at work and possibly impacts on livelihood. So I'm not equating in that sense. So I think I've said enough to suggest to you that we could always do with more. I believe that with what we have been given, we will get to the point where we will be significantly more effective. So we have been fortunate in that the most recent intake of persons, which took us to the amount of staff members that we had previously, these do not include the additional from the Prime Minister, right? So getting to that point, we've been fortunate to have coming into the ministry people with both decent experience, but also commitment to the field. So not just pulling officers from different places, but people who, because we were so intimately involved in the recruitment process, we are satisfied that we have some good people, and these new officers will not take the 3 to 5 years that a brand new officer will take. I say that to give some level of comfort, or alternately to reduce the level of discomfort, that we are improving, and we're going to be improving our delivery of justice to the public, to the working people of this country in pretty short order. What we are also doing that will assist us is creating some specialties. And I think the honorable member would remember the meeting, I think, at the Garfield Sobers Sports Complex, the gymnasium of that complex, when we were addressing the matter of construction. We recognized then, and we had good input from the Barbados Workers Union on that, we needed to create some specialty knowledge in the various areas. And while all officers will be able to respond to all queries, we will be developing some specialized knowledge in different areas for different officers so that we can go deeper into some of the issues. And all of us who deal with industrial relations know that you need sometimes specialized knowledge to deal with some things. I had a situation where I was conciliating a matter in the financial services sector. And for the first time, I'm hearing about midpoint, and I'm hearing about ranges, and I'm hearing about some things that you need special knowledge on to be able to address. We recognize that that is necessary in terms of how our officers are able to respond to workers and to respond to complaints, and also to respond to employers, because employers have questions from time to time as well. So that with the additional officers, the initial increase in complement that we already have, and then those whom the minister, like I indicated earlier, has given me the assurance that she will prioritize in the not too distant future, we believe that we will be able to significantly address the matter of dispensing justice. The matter of timelines is an important one. I thank you, Honourable Member, for raising that, because we talk sometimes about standards of service. When we don't have timelines, sometimes things can lag. It has been my judgment that we need to have a certain level of staffing before we speak to the timelines. But I will say that with respect to the Employment Rights Tribunal, we are now, I would say, in the final stages of putting the rules. Well, we have draft rules, they've been discussed with the social partners already, and in those draft rules, we have put in some pretty tight timelines, because like the Honourable Member for St. George North is intimating, or actually saying, timelines are important, particularly when people's livelihoods are at stake, or situations where people spend not an hour on the road, but 8 hours in an establishment. And so making sure that we have good timelines that are reasonable both for investigating officers and officers who have to move beyond investigating to make assessments, refer to legislation, refer to regulations. That, along with the ability of complainant and defendant to be able to give information, we've set a number of timelines in the draft rules for the tribunal that we believe will help us to push the matter of dispensing justice along. Once we are at that stage with respect to the Labor Department more generally, then we definitely will be putting some timelines in place so that we're not going to have situations where persons come with a complaint and 6 months later are saying that we haven't heard anything. So there's the matter of the timelines, there's the matter of getting back to persons, and then there's also the matter of enforcing when enforcement becomes necessary. Well, I shouldn't say when it becomes necessary. I'm talking about enforcing at the point of into the law courts when that becomes necessary. But enforcement is the work of the Labor Department from inception of any complaint, or even before complaints are laid.
Mr. Chair, I wish to thank the Honourable Minister for anticipating the line of thinking and answering in the way he did, and in so doing facilitating my capacity now to follow up with some questions that I wasn't sure how to get in as follow-up before. But I'm glad he raised the question of creating service standards. And although, through you, Chair, to the Honourable Minister, he was very specific on timelines as it relates to the Employment Rights Tribunal, I was glad that in the end, he kind of touched on it. But for the avoidance of doubt, I would want to have the Honourable Minister clarify whether he is recognizing the importance of, and whether he was saying that there is a commitment to ensuring or creating service standards at the Labour Department itself to ensure that those timelines, a person who complains about having honourable member for St. Michael's Central, their holiday pay being inaccurate, that there can be timelines within which those things are responded to, timelines for investigations, whether it is occupational safety and health or the person who's saying I'm being paid less than the minimum wage. Are you saying that those are timelines that the ministry is working towards for the Labour Department itself, even before we reach the tribunal?
I am absolutely saying that timelines are something that we will be working toward. I'm sorry if I give the impression that we are already working toward them, because we aren't, only because we have first to make sure we have the complement. It would not be fair for me or us to impose timelines and then make a mockery of them, because we don't have the persons to be able to facilitate the responses. So, but we are going to be having timelines for Labour Department matters. Now, the timelines, and these will be discussed obviously with the union, the workers' union, as well as the employers' organization. The timelines will, like the rules at the tribunal level, will need to include timelines on responses from employers in particular. Because generally speaking, I would say 8 to 9 times out of 10, the complainant will be a worker. So that the matter of getting a response from the employer needs to be factored in. And so the timelines from the Labour Department will not be able to stand on their own, because the Labour officer has to engage with an employer, has to get responses from an employer so that a proper assessment can be made. We recognize that a worker who feels hard done by, unfaired, disrespected, whatever, that is an urgent matter for the worker. The Labour officer is not able to hear the worker and make a decision, even though that may be the feeling of the worker. You have to engage with the employer, and you have to be able to get a response so that you can make a decision based on the facts as you've received them. It means that we will have to impose similar timelines on whoever the respondent is. And we're going to be discussing those with the social partners so that whatever we come up with, we are able to, if I go back to use the word enforce, to say, this is what you agreed, this is what we expect. Outside of that, then there's going to be some further action. It may mean that we have to codify it, because if it is not codified, somebody will, just laugh in your face and you ask him, but you can't do anything about it. So it may, and I probably use this opportunity to say that those timelines may very well have to be codified, and some element of sanction. I think the most important thing, though, and that's where the increasing staff complement at the Labour Department is important. What I find to be important in my ministry, but also in my work as a member of Parliament, is that people want to know that their issue has not been forgotten. So the matter of follow-up, and my interaction with Barbadians is that most people understand that solutions are not immediate even when it is a drastic situation. Not always immediate, or cannot always be immediate, but people want to know that you, whoever that you is, the member of parliament, in this case, we're talking about the labor officer, the labor department more generally, my issue is being addressed. And so the matter of follow-up, getting back to persons is also something that currently we are working on to make sure that the public, the workers of the country, know that all issues are being addressed. We have not reached where we want to reach, so I'm not trying to give the impression that we are there. We are definitely not there, but that is an area that we are working on. We will be working on the timelines a little bit later, but we are working on the matter of responding, because that's really one of the issues.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And as a follow-up, therefore, you spoke about the timelines for the Employment Rights Tribunal, and you also made mention of the fact that you will also be focusing on like the respondents' responses, typically to matters raised. And I heard you on the fact that you're working towards ensuring that the tribunal can have set timelines for responding to matters as well. What is concerning, though, is that sometimes there's a complaint, the respondents file in time, and I guess that comment will be to the fact that sometimes matters are before the tribunal for years before those matters are started. And my colleague said justice delayed is justice denied. But, well, there's another way to put it. Well, the grass is growing, the horse is starving, and that is real for many people. But on the issue of timelines and the Employment Rights Tribunal, so I was glad you went there so I can get in this follow-up. Should we also has the moment come for the Employment Rights Act to be amended in such a way that penalties will be able to carry interest, where not only where it's the fault of the tribunal, not where it is the fault of the tribunal for not hearing in a timely manner, because you're going to fix that, but where there is an award made and the person who's supposed to make the award refuses to honor the award, and eventually when that award is paid, it is paid without interest. And worse yet, where they're refusing to make the award, but they're being allowed to invest in other areas of this country to go and do the same nonsense, presumably again. But that last part is just me putting it in, but the part I really want you to respond to is whether the time has come for interest for the Employment Rights Act to be relooked to address this.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. You're absolutely correct. It is time, and that is one of the, if my memory serves me correctly, one of the amendments that is in the proposed amendment. We are now at the point where we're going to send back to CPC, and we're also going to get some input from the Law Review Commission. But we have done the work, and I know that this matter is a long-standing matter. The amendment to the Act, this has been outstanding for a long time, for too long a time, but we are making significant progress. The matter of interest on the awards is one that is being addressed, because we recognize that you do, the people taking advantage of the situation. So the amount is the amount, but you take forever to pay it, and like you know, and we know, there's also the attendant reduction in the value of the money. So $20 now, and you take 5 years to pay, is not the same as $20 in the future. So we have to make sure of that. There's also another proposed amendment, the details of which I can't remember, but I think it is related, and it has to do with the amount that the magistrate's court can adjudicate over Yeah, and I think there's a proposal to make a change. I'm going to be careful in what I say because I don't want to say the wrong thing or then be held. But I know that is a similar issue, having to wait to go to a high court. We wanted to be able to deal with these things at the magistrate's court, but we recognized that there was a limitation somewhere along the line. I'm not a lawyer, but there's a limitation somewhere, and that is something that we want to address. Now, also related to the matter of things taking long, we have 3 tribunal chairs, 1 full-time. That decision was made with the understanding that if the workload requires, that we could make a second one full-time, or maybe all 3. We started with 1. It should have really happened when we had a proper home so we could understand how we were progressing, because the expectation on my part and the ministry's part is that we are going to progress. In other words, dispense labor justice in a much more timely manner, or in a less untimely manner. So that I just wanted to add that while we have currently 1 full-time chair, if we need to move to 2, the discussion that we had in cabinet already is of the sense that if that is what we needed to do, that we could go back to cabinet to get cabinet's approval to go in that direction. So I wanted to say those 2 things, but the underlying issue is the amendment to the Employment Rights Act. I said it in my opening, and I said it just now as well. It's being outstanding, but we are making progress. A lot of the amendments were weighty and substantial, so we spent a lot of time discussing. But that notwithstanding, we are at the point now where we can go back to CPC, and then the Law Review Commission is going to weigh in, and we'll be able to move forward.
Thank you, Minister, and I'm glad you raised that, and so that I don't incur the wrath of the chairman, I won't walk any closer to the crease, but I will come back in on the efficiency of the Employment Rights Tribunal and issues relating to the amendments process and so on in another round.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Thank you, Minister. Honourable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I beg to move that you do not report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg leave to sit again.
The question is that I do not report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again. All honourable members in favor, say aye. Honourable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honourable Leader, Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I beg to move the suspension of the House until 2:15.
The question is that this honourable chairman will be suspended until 2:15 p.m. All those honourable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This honourable chairman stands suspended until 2:15 p.m.